The wind spoke in whispers that morning, not of storms or omens, but of stillness. It curled through the alleys of Messina like a breath held too long. Between stone walls and sagging roofs it carried the scent of damp wool, stale grain, and something older, the smell of rot before it finds a name in the hills above. Where the olive trees bent like old men and the goats chewed lazily at dry roots, the day began without notice. Smoke rose thin from hearths. A widow swept dust from the chapel steps. Children chased one another barefoot through the brittle grass, unaware they were racing through the last morning the world would ever be the same. At the harbor, sails hung limp on ships that had sailed too far for too long. Their timbers moaned. With the weight of cargo, no one dared inventory. Their crews did not shout. There were no songs from the decks, no laughter spilled from the stern. Just silence. In the slow, deliberate creak of ropes being lowered, not with joy, but with caution. One ship was older than the rest. Black-stained wood, strange markings near the hull. Its name, once carved in pride, had been worn away by salt and time. It had arrived in the night unannounced. No greetings. No captain stepping proudly ashore. Just figures hunched, pale, trembling who stumbled down the gangplank and collapsed in the mud. Rats poured from the hold like water from a burst. Pipe, slick and quick, vanishing into the gutters of Messina. In the monastery, the bells had not yet rung. Brother Matteo lit the final candle of lauds, whispering the morning psalm. His fingers, swollen from arthritis, trembled as they traced the cross over his chest. He did not know that the flame he kindled would be the last light for half the city. He only noticed distantly how thick the air felt, how even the silence seemed, expectant. By mid-morning, the docks had grown uneasy. A sailor, no more than 20, lay beneath a canvas tarp near the fish market. His skin was flushed with a bruised purple, his eyes open but empty, staring. Past the crowd, as if watching something approach from beyond the bay, a merchant muttered that the boy had drunk too much arrack. A priest knelt beside him to offer last rites, but recoiled when he saw the swell beneath the boy's neck, a great black knot, pulsing like a blistered plum. The priest did not finish the prayer. He stood and walked away without a word. Whispers began to spread faster than the tide. It came from the east, someone said. A curse from Cyprus. The Mongols sent it in their bones. Punishment for the Crusades. No rats in a city without sin. Stories grew like fungus, but no story could keep pace with what followed. By evening, 2 more had died. By nightfall, it was 10, and still. The bells had not rung. It was on the second day that the first scream echoed through the market square high. Shrill, unending. A mother, clutching her infant, shaking him like a broken doll. His face was already gray. She would not let him go. Not until the monks came with their cloth-wrapped poles, urging her to give the body to God. She spit in their faces, but the church was not taking bodies yet, not openly. The cathedral doors remained closed, its holy water font dry. Inside, the bishop paced. I prayed aloud, his voice cracking with each repetition. He asked for protection, for mercy, for meaning, but he knew. The words felt hollow. Even the saints in the stained glass seemed to avert their eyes. On the 3rd day, the church bell finally rang once. For the sailor again. For the merchant's daughter, 3rd time slower, deeper. For the priest who had dared to kneel. To close, and then nothing. Not a chime, not a bird's song. Even the crows had gone. The city shifted. It did not scream. It did not resist. It exhaled. A long, tired breath, as if somewhere in its foundations. It already knew that it had been marked. Fishermen stopped casting nets. The markets emptied. The wine soured in barrels that were never opened. Doors were bolted. Candles were lit at all hours, their flames flickering behind tightly drawn curtains. The scent of myrrh and vinegar began to replace the sweetness of baked bread. And all the while, the rats remained, darting through shadows, feasting on what the living could not finish, their red eyes blinking in torchlight, their silence, more mocking than any scream. A girl in the merchant quarter counted the bells each night. 3, then 7, then none. She began to scratch tallies into the wall beside her cot. Her mother thought it was madness, but the girl knew. She could hear the world thinning. One night she said aloud to the dark, "What happens when the bells stop ringing?" No one answered. Down by the wharf, the ships stood abandoned. Their cargo, silks, oils, spices, even relics, were left untouched, as if cursed. As if to move them would invite the thing hiding beneath the wood, and still the wind came, unchanged, uninterested, blowing gently through the skeletal sails, through the cloisters, through the alleys where no children played. On the 5th day, the gravediggers refused to bury the bodies, not out of rebellion, but fear. One had found his brother beneath the latest sheet, another his wife. They left the carts full and walked away, heads down, shovels dropped in the mud like swords after a lost war. The bishop, now too sick to stand, wrote one final decree before, collapsing, close the ports, burn the cloth, bury the dead outside the city walls. It was too late. The harbor, once Messina's lifeblood, had become its mouth of death, and the tide, black, patient, endless, had already begun to rise as the sun set on the 7th day. The girl in the merchant quarter stopped counting. The bell had not rung. The city, the first time in living memory, slept in silence, and somewhere beyond the hills the crows returned, not in flight, but in stillness, watching, waiting, as if they too had heard the sound of something breaking, not a bone, not a gate, but the seal that once held the world together. What came next would not arrive with swords or sermons. It would not declare war or demand tribute. It would creep, unseen, unnamed. It would turn every breath into a wager and every village into a prayer the heavens would never answer. It began not with thunder, but with scratching, soft at first. The kind of sound the ear mistakes for wind or memory. In the corners of bakeries, beneath the altar stones, under floorboards soaked with wine and weeping they came. Rats, not the timid ones that scurried from torchlight, but bold, fat things. Their eyes gleamed with something colder than hunger. In the poorer quarters, where meat was rare and water was drawn from shared wells, they slipped into bedchambers like shadows. Mothers woke to find bread gone. Fathers discovered blisters where once there had only been tiredness. The rats did not run. They lingered, they watched, and in their wake came fever. It moved without rules. Child laughed at dawn and died before. Dusk, a priest collapsed mid-sermon, chalice still in hand. The butcher's hands turned black before he could sharpen his blade. At first, they called it the sweating sickness, then the blue rot, then simply it, because no name could hold it, and no prayer could move it. The cross once lifted to command storms and spirits, now looked down on an unblinking enemy. Buboes flowered along necks and thighs, purple and black and hot to the touch. Pulsed like curses. Physicians arrived with plague masks shaped like the beaks of birds, stuffed with dried roses and mint, as if scent could hold back death.
Ow.
Their robes rustled like paper. Their hands never touched skin. They did not heal. They recorded in the monastery of St. Leontis. 10 monks remained from the 40 who had once chanted beneath its arches. Their psalms now sounded like morning songs, each morning one fewer voice. The abbot, who once claimed that pestilence was a test of faith, died on the stone floor, clutching his crucifix so tightly it left a bloodied imprint across his palm. No test, they whispered now. A reckoning in the market. The air stank of ash and tallow. Every hour a new body. Some were left in doorways, others beneath saint statues. Families too poor for burial dragged their loved ones to the edge of the square and wept until the city guards forced them back. Funeral chants were shortened and eliminated. A wave of silence replaced ritual. A boy stood outside the baker's shop, still clutching a coin in his blistered hand. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. When the baker finally opened the door, the boy collapsed in his arms already cold. The baker wept as he buried him behind the oven, and still the rats remained. They grew bold, scuttling over pews, gnawing on the leather bindings of holy books. One climbed the altar during evening mass, stared down the priest, and bared its teeth. The congregation gasped, but no one moved. No one dared, because deep down they had begun to wonder who now bore the mark of the sacred, the man in robes, or the beast untouched by sickness. In darkened rooms, whispered prayers turned desperate. Let it take the wicked, some begged. Let it pass over the children. Let it end with me. But the plague had no ear for bargains, chose with indifference. The glutton and the virgin, the thief and the nun, all fell alike, and always before the fever. Came the scratching by the second month, fires burned in the square day and night. Clothes, bedding, even entire homes were set alight. It was said fire cleansed. But the flame also destroyed the little they had left. A woman tossed her only blanket into the blaze, tears streaming as she prayed the ashes would lift her family's name from the ledger of death. At the edge of town, a procession began, hooded figures in coarse linen. They walked barefoot, flogging their own backs with knotted ropes, blood streaking down to their ankles. Mercy, 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 they cried with each strike. They believed their pain could atone for all, that God would spare the world if enough blood was offered voluntarily. But God did not answer. The town square, once full of fishmongers and gossip, now bore a new altar, a makeshift gallows. Some said the Jews had poisoned the wells. Others blamed witches, midwives, or foreign merchants. Like the plague spread fast, and so the noose became its own form of prayer, a cry for control in a world that had none. One man, a scholar with ink-stained fingers, stood beneath the cross and shouted, "If this is divine punishment, where is the mercy? If this is natural, where is the pattern?" They stoned him before he finished. Better to kill a question than face it. Inside the churches, incense was burned thick enough to choke. It masked the stench, but not the truth. Priests blessed the same handful of oil over and over again, stopped asking for miracles. They began asking for sleep. Children drew pictures in the dirt of angels with broken wings, of animals wearing crowns. One girl drew a rat with a halo. When asked what it meant, she replied, "He speaks to the others, says this world belongs to them now." No one laughed, and still the bells tolled, reluctant more a groan than a call. Every chime, a farewell, in the heart of the monastery. The youngest monk, Brother Elias, took it upon himself to keep the list, names, dates, symptoms. He wrote them in charcoal, on scraps of parchment and the backs of old psalms. His hands shook, his breath rasped. But he wrote. One night he added his own name. He paused before the ink touched the parchment. Then, with slow care, he wrote, Brother Elias, fevered, still breathing. It would be the last name he ever recorded. By the time the snow came, it did not fall on a city, but on a memory. Streets half buried in ash, churches with doors blown open, homes hollowed like skulls. Only the rats moved freely now, their tracks the only ones fresh in the snow. The cross still stood, weathered by wind, streaked by soot, surrounded not by the faithful, but by silence. Its shadow fell long across the earth, thin as a dying breath. Some say that winter brought stillness, that the cold slowed the death, that the plague paused. But those who lived through it knew better. It was not mercy, it was preparation. The storm had only begun to feed, and in that hush beneath the cross, beneath the snow, beneath the gaze of 1,000 waiting eyes, the earth trembled faintly, as if beneath it something ancient and patient was waking. Dawn came colorless, not the gold-streaked promise of spring, but a pale, empty light that crept across rooftops like a thief. In the baker's quarters, smoke still rose, not from bustling ovens or the bustle of trade, but from ash and slow ruin. The scent of bread had vanished. What lingered now was the stink of mildew, wet grain, and scorched flour. Inside one narrow shop, the baker stood alone. sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands sunk into dough. His arms trembled, not from the effort, but from hunger. His wife lay curled beneath a wool blanket in the back room, her skin waxen, her breath thin. Their youngest child hadn't stirred in 2 days. Still, he baked. The dough was uneven, dry. The salt jar had been empty for weeks. He no longer checked. It's just water, flour, a prayer. He muttered it aloud, not to God, but to the memory of what baking used to be. Let it rise. Let it hold. His hands knew the rhythm, even as his heart. No longer believed in warmth. Outside the market square was a graveyard of silence. Stalls stood abandoned, their colorful awnings faded to ghost gray. Flies buzzed over a crate of rotting apples. No one shouted prices. No one haggled. Only a few souls drifted through, clutching cloth to their mouths, eyes hollow, feet bare. One man knelt by the fountain, drinking from cupped hands, his knuckles raw with sores. Behind him, a cart creaked past, another filled with the dead. The baker opened his door. A simple act. A ritual of habit. He placed 3 loaves on the sill. No coin box. No prices. He simply watched. A girl, no older than 10, appeared from behind a shuttered stall. Her hands were wrapped in torn linen, her cheeks sunken, her hair matted. She hesitated. The bread steamed in the chill air. The baker nodded once. She took a loaf and ran, vanishing like mist. That night, the baker wept. Not because she had stolen, because he hadn't remembered her name, though she had played with his sons. Only last summer, in the weeks before, the baker had fed the church, the monastery, the city watch. Now none came, not for trade, not for confession. Hunger had stolen language. There were no more please or thank you, only glances, only need. Across the square, a woman boiled shoe leather in a cracked pot. The broth was black, bitter. She whispered lullabies as her son drank. He asked for honey. She smiled, but her voice broke when she lied. Tomorrow, love. When the bees return. But there were no bees. Only flies, fat and fearless. They buzzed through the chapel windows now, landing on icons and corpses alike. The altar was dusted, not with ash, but with dried blood. Even faith had turned bitter on the tongue. In the corner of the cathedral, Father Lucian fasted, not from piety, but plague. His stomach had twisted itself into knots. He had not eaten in 4 days. Still, he knelt before the image of Christ and whispered, "Was it my pride?" No answer, just the creak of the rafters above, and the scurry of tiny claws. The baker saw fewer faces each morning. The butcher's sign had fallen, half-charred. The midwife's door was marked with chalk. No one entered, no one left. The apothecary had locked himself inside, hammering boards across his shutters while shouting scripture. Some said he drank his own tinctures to stave off death. Others said he'd gone mad long before in his home. The baker lit a candle and broke the final loaf into 3 pieces, one for his wife, one for the boy, and one for himself. But the boy did not wake. He sat beside him in the dim room, listening to the wind push against the walls. The child's chest rose, barely. The skin beneath his jaw was bruising, purple like overripe fruit. The baker turned his head, could not watch the end. He chewed the bread slowly. It crumbled like chalk. No salt, no taste. Just survival in the shape of a crust. That night, the priest knocked at the door. He was gaunt, cloaked in sackcloth, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. He didn't ask for food. He asked for flour. For the chapel, he rasped. "We've none left for Mass." The baker stared at him. "Why do you still bake it?" he asked. The priest hesitated. Then, because the body must be broken whether he answers or not, the baker gave him a bowl. It was not much, but it was what he had. After the priest left, the baker sat beside his wife. She was awake now, barely, her lips cracked. Her eyes drifted from corner to corner, following something he could not see. She whispered, "Did they ring the bells today?" Shook his head. "Then it's not my time," she smiled faintly. "The bells will call me. They always have." He kissed her forehead. It was too warm in the alley behind his shop. The rats feasted. They gnawed on spoiled grain, on broken bones. On cloth soaked with sickness. They were everywhere now. Bold. Unafraid. One climbed the windowsill and stared. Through the glass, the baker did not move. He simply lit another candle and turned his back, a few doors down. The candlemaker's home had been turned into a hospice. 3 sisters ran it now, veiled, silent, barefoot. They burned lavender in the hallways, but no scent could cleanse what clung to the walls. They took in whoever still breathed. No questions. No names. That morning, they received 7. By nightfall, 2 remained. The baker carried what bread he could spare to their door and left it there without knocking. One sister watched from the shadows. She made the sign of the cross as he walked away. He did not see it in the night. Snow began to fall, thin flakes gray with soot. They blanketed the empty stalls, softened the sound of footsteps, covered the dead where carts had not come. The baker stood beneath it, face tilted to the sky. He thought of salt, how snow on the tongue tasted the same when you were young. He let it melt on his lips, and for the first time in days, he whispered a name his son's. No reply, just the hush of snowfall and the steady, rhythmic gnawing beneath the floor. By morning, the bread was gone from the sill. No coin left in return, only a white stone, smoothed by the sea. Resting in the center of the wooden board, a child's offering, a silent thank you, or a gravestone. He had once been the voice of the village Father Anselm, whose sermons danced like firelight in the cold stone nave. His words had comforted births and softened deaths, blessing the fields with Latin laced and lilac smoke. But now, the censer rusted on its chain, untouched, once wet with psalms, stayed closed, even when the dead were dragged to the steps of his church, eyes glassy, fingers curled like dried roots. They said he had seen something, a girl who bled black from her eyes, a boy who prayed until his tongue split, a mother who sang as her children blistered in her arms. Whatever it was, it stole the words from his throat like a thief in fog. The villagers came still, kneeling, on damp stone, whispering litanies into their sleeves. But Father Anselm no longer raised his hand in blessing. He sat behind the altar, motionless, his robe stiff with old incense and candle soot. His eyes were open but fixed elsewhere, on something just past the veil of the visible world. Once, a widow wailed at him. She begged for last rites for her only son, who coughed blood into his straw bed. Her sobs echoed through the arches like bird cries in a tomb. Anselm only looked at her, lips unmoving. She screamed then, not at death, but at the betrayal of silence. That night, someone carved deaf to God into the church door. The bells no longer rang at dusk in his silence. Others began to speak. A toothless healer offered roots and vinegar and claimed visions. From St. Apollonia, farmer declared the plague a punishment for dancing, for whores, for cheese curdled on feast days. Another said it was the Jews, poisoning wells with foreign curses. And still, Father Anselm did not speak. Inside the church, the crucifix seemed heavier. Dust gathered on the chalice. Mice chewed the hymnals. The sacred became abandoned. The stone basin, once filled with holy water, now held only gray rain. But Anselm watched. He watched as the village turned on itself, prayers replaced with suspicion, processions with torches. He watched the candles burn lower each night, their flames shivering like frightened lambs. Once he dreamed of a field of white lilies. In the dream, each lily held a child's face. When the wind came, they opened their mouths to sing, but no sound emerged, just the rustling of dry petals. When he awoke, he found a crow perched on the altar. It stared at him, and for the first time in weeks, he whispered a single word, "Why?" No answer came, only the echo of his own voice, soft as dying breath, bouncing off the nave's cold walls. Outside, the sun broke through for a moment. Light spilled through the stained glass, scattering color on the floor, red, blue, gold, like the torn flags of a forgotten kingdom. He did not move. The moment passed, and the silence returned, good now, as if the walls themselves had begun to mourn. Some say Father Anselm died seated there, eyes open, soul already gone. Others say he walked out one night into the woods beyond the hill, barefoot and humming a hymn only he remembered. But long after he vanished, children would place pebbles at the church door, hoping silence could be bargained with or understood. Inside, the crows returned, and their wings stirred the dust where prayers had once lived. In the distance, a windmill groaned, its blades turning like a clock with no numbers. No future, the village listened, waiting for a sound that never came. She was born beneath the chopping block. Her first lullaby was the sound of cleavers on bone, her cradle a wine crate lined with salted hides. The townspeople called her Lisa, a name that once meant God's promise, though no one spoke of God anymore without coughing first. Her father had been Messina's butcher for 30 years, his apron always red, his face always kind. He taught her how to sharpen a blade, how to hold a heart without trembling. But by the spring of the second year, his hands shook too much to carve. So Lisa took the knife, and the knife took everything else. At first, she used it only for meat. The dogs needed feeding, and the dead left no wills. But soon, there were two. Many mouths crying infants whose mothers had melted into fever, boys too small to bury their own. No one asked where the meat came from. Hunger bleached the soul. She told herself it was mercy. The city had collapsed into quiet savagery. Carriages rotted in the streets. Church doors were nailed shut from the outside. The mayor had hung himself, with a curtain rope, and nobody cut him down. But Lisa walked, always barefoot, from alley to alley, her blade wrapped in linen, her face calm. To the children, she became a mother. To the dying, she became a ghost. One morning, she found a boy, curled in the gutter, clutching a rag doll soaked in vomit. His skin was blistered, his eyes wide with that awful knowledge that only children of plague carry, the understanding that grown-ups lie, and angels do not come. She carried him home, washed his feet, held him through the night as his breath thickened like sap. By dawn, he was gone. She did not cry. She just sharpened the blade. The rumors began with a widow, the only woman in the square still combing her hair. She said she'd seen Lisa enter the gravedigger's shed and leave with a sack of ribs. Another claimed she'd watched her carve a cross into the forehead of a corpse before boiling it in herbs. They called her witch. They called her cannibal. But they still knocked on her door. When their children couldn't breathe, Lisa never answered. She left meat in the barrels near the well, sometimes apples. Once, a bundle of dried violets wrapped in wool string. The priest would not speak of her. The council was gone. Justice had no shape anymore, just suspicion and echo. But one evening, as the crows wheeled above the rooftops, a mob gathered. Torches, pitchforks, the ritual of the frightened. They found her in the butcher's shop, alone, kneeling in prayer, not to God, but to the children she had failed to save. She didn't plead. She didn't scream. She only looked at them. Those neighbors, those mothers with a gaze too tired for anger. They burned the shop. They say she walked into the flames without flinching, but others swear she vanished in the smoke, that the next morning a fresh cut of lamb lay outside the well, wrapped in a linen stained red, still warm. And the children, the ones left, they buried her name in stories. Stories about a barefoot girl with blood under her fingernails and kindness in her silence. They whispered her tale before sleep, not as warning, but as promise, that mercy can wear terrible faces, and that even in plague, someone might still choose to feed the living, no matter the price. Outside the ruined shop, the crows waited, and the wind shifted, carrying not just the stench of rot, but the faint scent of cloves, in guilt. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. The monk, who refused to die, in a cloister overgrown with ivy and silence. Brother Matteo knelt in the chapel's apse, unmoved by the stench of corpses leaking through the stone. The candles had long since melted. into puddles, their flames snuffed by the damp breath of death. The icons on the walls, once kissed daily by trembling pilgrims, were now veiled in soot, their eyes hollowed by neglect. Matteo remained. He had not spoken in 87 days. Not since Abbot Jerome collapsed mid-prayer and bled into the Book of Hours. Not since the novices screamed and fled, out carrying infection into the hills with their fear. He stayed behind not out of courage but penance. Long ago, in a confession whispered through wooden bars, a nobleman had told him of a sin so terrible it broke Matteo's faith. He had offered no absolution, and in that refusal, he believed, the Black Death had found a crack in the wall. So now he waited. For forgiveness, for punishment. For something each morning, Matteo dragged the dead from the courtyard into the crypt, reciting psalms until his throat turned raw. The silence after each burial was louder than the chants. On the 30th day, the last bell rope snapped from overuse. From then on, the dead passed unnoticed. But Matteo wrote their names. Hundreds of them. He used wine when the ink ran dry. Blood when the wine was gone. He scrawled them on the walls, the floors. The altar cloth, every surface became a ledger, a desperate plea to God. Remember them. Even if you forget me. One night the fever came. It started with a shiver. Then the throat tightened. The dark bruises bloomed across his ribs. He stumbled into the nave, collapsed beneath the crucifix, and smiled. This is it, he whispered, finally. But the next morning he woke alive, and again the next, and again. The sickness clung to him. But it would not finish him. His skin burned, his tongue swelled, his breath came in shallow gulps. Still he did not die. Villagers began to whisper of the monk who could not perish. They came in secret, watching from beyond the iron gate. One brought bread, another a vial of rosewater. A girl left a kitten at the threshold. None dared speak to him. None crossed the gate. They feared him more than they feared the plague. But one boy barefoot, mute, orphan, climbed the wall. He entered the chapel and found Matteo crumpled before the altar, feverish and weeping. He did not flinch. He knelt beside him, took his hand, began to hum a strange, tuneless melody. Perhaps remembered from a mother, now dust. And for the first time in months, Matteo's eyes cleared. Do you want to die, brother? The boy asked, not with voice, but gaze. Matteo answered with a breath. I wanted to, but not anymore. He took the boy in. They lit candles together. They buried the forgotten. They sang not hymns, but lullabies. And slowly, the chapel filled with strange sounds. Laughter. The scratch of quills on parchment. The purr of a cat curled beside the altar. When spring came, wildflowers burst through the cracked tiles of the cloister floor. The villagers returned, and they found not a graveyard but a sanctuary inside. Brother Matteo sat in the sunlight, reading to the boy from a salvaged Bible, its cover patched with goat leather and hope. He never recovered fully. His body remained frail, his cough persistent, but the fever never returned. They say God kept him alive to atone, but Matteo believed something else, that sometimes the soul refuses to leave because one last task remains, to witness, to remember, to keep the light burning for those who didn't make it, and to prove that, even in a world of rot and ruin, kindness, too, can be contagious. By midsummer, the scent of death had changed. It was no longer sharp or shocking, it was familiar, like wet earth or burnt bread. The people of Messina no longer flinched when it reached them. They simply turned, their faces to the wind, and walked faster. But inside the church of St. Agatha, the smell was different. It came not from rot, but from something worse, layers of old incense, mildew, sweat, and forgotten prayers. The cross above the altar still hung, crooked now, one arm lowered as if surrendering. Beneath it the floorboards had darkened, stained by more than candle wax. Blood, bile, tears. Father Girolamo was the last priest in the city. He had stopped giving last rites. There were too many. He had stopped preaching. The pews were empty. He no longer rang the bells. No one came. Instead, each morning, he stood at the pulpit and whispered a litany of names carved into benches, scratched onto candle stubs, mumbled by the dying as they clutched his sleeves. He read them aloud to no one. Each name was a thread holding the city together. One day, a group of flagellants arrived, robed in sackcloth, faces masked, backs bleeding from their own whips. They marched into the church without a word, their procession silent but for the slap of leather on flesh. They called their pain holy, their wounds offerings. They didn't ask Girolamo for permission. They didn't ask God either. For 3 days they chanted and bled in the nave, promising the end of the plague if enough pain was spilled on sacred ground. People came to watch. Some wept, others vomited, a girl fainted. A man dropped dead in the back pew and was not removed. On the 4th day, the leader of the flagellants collapsed. No one helped him. By nightfall, they had all perished. One by one, silently Girolamo buried them behind the church with the others. No words, no cross, only a single stone. Began locking the doors after that, not out of fear but mercy. People still knocked, begged for sanctuary, for healing, for water. For answers, he could offer none, and so he listened. That he could still do. Through the thick wood, he pressed his forehead and listened to the stories of strangers. A baker who had eaten her last sack of flour raw, hoping to feel full one final time. A soldier who'd deserted, too ashamed to die in armor. A woman who confessed to mercy killing her fevered mother with a silk pillow. Girolamo listened, and when they were done, he would press a single word through the wood: forgiven. Whether they believed him or not, they always left quieter. One evening the wind shifted. Storm rolled in from the sea. Thunder shook the rafters. Rain poured through the broken stained glass, baptizing the empty pews. Girolamo stood beneath the cross, arms outstretched, eyes wide. "Take me," he said aloud, but the storm passed, and he remained. In the days that followed, he stopped speaking. Entirely, he lit no candles, he wore no vestments. He sat beneath the crooked cross, unmoving, a figure of stone carved by grief, until, one morning, a child entered, no older than 7, barefoot, covered in soot. He did not speak. He only walked down the aisle, climbed onto the priest's lap, and rested his head on Girolamo's chest. The priest did not move, but his hand trembled, and then, gently, it closed around the boy's back. The cross above them hung crooked still, but beneath it, 2 living bodies remained, a heartbeat, a breath, and in the silence that followed, it was not the smell of death that lingered, but the faintest trace of myrrh. At the center of Messina stood the old communal well around. Stone-lipped mouth that had quenched thirst for generations, whispered secrets through bucket chains, and cooled the feet of laughing children in. Summers long gone, now it was surrounded by silence. No footsteps, no buckets, no chatter, only the occasional cough echoing off the walls. Carried down like a prayer, the earth refused to answer. One afternoon, a man named Luca returned to the well, barefoot and swaying. Once a stonemason, now a ghost of that trade, he had buried 3 sons in a single week. He had not eaten in 2 days. His voice was thin, brittle like moth wings. He leaned over the edge and whispered, "Why us?" The well did not respond. It's only a cold, distant drip from deep within. Luca sat beside it, knees to his chest. By nightfall, others came quiet. Hollow-eyed figures with scarves over their mouths and wax-sealed charms dangling from their necks. They didn't draw water. They simply sat. A midwife whispered the name of every child she'd delivered. It's now dead. A thief confessed to stealing bread and regretting it not at all. A soldier recited psalms until his tongue stuck to his teeth. And slowly, the well became a confessional not to God, not to any priest, but to stone and shadow and stillness. People needed somewhere to speak, somewhere to leave their voices when the dead had taken everyone else. Some even believed the well answered. A widow once claimed she heard her husband's laughter in the echo. A child swore she heard the voice of her dog saying her name, Luca. He heard nothing, and that, perhaps, was worse. One morning a girl climbed into the well. She was small, so small her ribs had become a cage around nothing but breath. Her parents had died the night before. No one stopped her. They watched in silence as she tied a rope around her waist and lowered herself into the dark. The rope snapped halfway down. They waited. No splash, no scream, only stillness. For hours, no one moved, until finally a sound floated up, not a voice. Not a cry, a song, faint, broken, but real. A lullaby, sung in a child's trembling voice, rising from the stone throat of the earth. A song about bees and almonds and spring that would never come again. Lucas stood, grabbed a bucket, and dropped it. Down he waited. When he pulled it up, it was filled not with water, but with something else, a handful of violets, damp, crushed, real. That night, the city came alive around the well again, not with joy, not with revival, but with something simpler. Hope a woman brought bread, still warm. A boy with fever was wrapped in wool and laid gently beside the stones. The midwife sang the lullaby to no one in particular. And Luca, the first time in weeks, slept without dreaming of graves. The well said nothing, but it had begun to listen. They came at dusk, when the sky was bruised violet and the streets were slick with soot and prayer wax. Not from Messina, no. These were strangers, foreigners cloaked in black linen, their faces veiled, their feet bare despite the frost curling in the alleys. The city had heard whispers of them, long before they arrived, whispers carried by merchants who fled. Genoa and tales scribbled in the margins of dying monks' journals, the Flagloants. 40 of them, moving as one body, chanting in a language, too old for the priests to translate. Their backs were bloodied from self-inflicted lashes, their eyes wild with something deeper than grief and ancient. Shaking ecstasy, they walked in a line through the heart of the city, dragging chains behind them, each link a prayer, each clang a penance. Children peered from broken shutters. Widows knelt in doorways. The brave crossed themselves. The desperate begged them to stay. The bishop watched from the cathedral steps, face pale behind incense smoke. These men carried no relics, no icons, only pain. They claimed the plague was not a curse of the body, but of the soul, not from rats or ships, but from sin itself. And so, they bled publicly for the world's wrongs. Each night, they gathered in the ruined plaza, once filled with markets and music, now littered with ash and teeth. There, they beat their backs until the stones were painted red. They cried out for absolution, for mercy, for the Virgin to return her gaze to mankind. Some believed, some wept, some joined them. Among the crowd was Matteo the undertaker's apprentice, who had lost the strength to dig. His hands, raw from burying neighbors, had become too tired to fold the arms of children. He watched the flagellants trembling. On the third night, took off his shirt and joined the line. He never returned home. But something strange began to happen after that. The rats vanished from the southern docks. The fever eased in one orphanage. The baker's cough stilled for a day. Whispers again. It's working. A mother tied thorns to her wrists. A priest walked barefoot into the basilica, chanting Psalm 51 until he collapsed. But for every small miracle, 2 more died. And yet the procession marched on, each lash louder, each chant darker. One night, a girl followed them to the edge of the hills. She was mute, no more than 10, with ink black hair and a necklace made of teeth. She stayed behind them for miles, barefoot, silent, unwavering. At dawn, she returned alone. Her eyes had changed. She spoke only one sentence. They're not praying to God. That evening, the bishop ordered the gates shut. The procession was gone. No footprints, no blood trails. No. No think. No think. No think. No think. Nothing but silently the think, said night. The bell tower cracked down its spine. Messina awoke to a sound no one could explain. Laughter not joyous, not cruel, but ancient, the kind of laughter that comes from something that's been watching too long. The church was never meant to be. Silent for centuries, its stones had swallowed confession, echoed chants, held fast against siege and heresy. But now, even the saints had gone quiet. Their painted eyes, once kind, now seemed to avert their gaze. Inside the cathedral, the altar was empty. The golden crucifix had tarnished, its polish flaked like dead skin. The Virgin's statue bore a crack through her heart, and beneath her, feet, wax pooled like melted flesh, lit by candles that would not stay lit. Father Lorenzo tried to lead Mass, but his voice betrayed him. It trembled on Latin syllables, broke on the names of the dead. The pews were half filled with shadows people, too gaunt to kneel, too afraid to sing. They mouthed prayers, not out of faith, but out of fear of what silence might bring instead. One night he left the cathedral doors wide open. "Let God come and see," he whispered. That was the week the sky turned copper. Birds spiraled in circles and dropped mid-flight. The sea went still as glass. No tide, no sound, just floating, swollen things with bloated eyes. Horses began refusing water. Bees vanished. Dogs howled at empty rooms. And in the bell tower, something moved. Not a man, not a child. Something heavier, something deliberate. The bell no longer rang with rope, but with unseen hands. It tolled at odd hours. 3 times at dawn, once at noon, 7 times near midnight. Always the same. Order, always the same rhythm. Some claimed it was a code. The bishop fasted for 9 days and locked himself in the reliquary. He emerged with bloody palms and a single conclusion. The saints are no longer listening. The relic St. Lucia's bone shard, St. Benedict's teeth. The cloth stained with martyrs' blood were removed from their altars and carried through the streets in final procession. Thousands followed. They wept. They sang. The procession never returned. Some say it was swallowed by mist, just beyond the eastern wall. Others swear they heard wings, massive, slow, dragging across rooftops just after the last hymn faded. All that remained was a sandal, a broken torch, and the scent of lilies rotting in the summer heat. In the days that followed, paintings inside the church began to peel. Angels lost their eyes, the face of Christ blurred like wet chalk. Even the mosaics, so carefully laid by generations past, began to unmake themselves, tiny stones popping loose one by one, as if rejecting their image. By now, no one went to Mass, not out of defiance, but because they knew it wasn't God who waited behind the altar anymore. It was something older, something patient, and it had learned how to wear silence like a crown.